The fog hung low over Millbrook Hollow that November morning, thick enough to muffle sound and turn the world into something ghostly. In the valley where Copper Creek wound between hills dressed in bare trees, most folks kept their eyes down, focused on getting through another hard season. The Henderson Mill had closed 3 years back, and the town seemed to be closing with it, one boarded window at a time. People stopped noticing things that didn't concern their immediate survival. They stopped looking at abandoned places, at forgotten creatures, at anything that reminded them how much had already been lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you, which is why nobody saw the white horse dying in the field behind Thornhill Farm. Nobody except an 11-year-old boy with too much silence in his heart and nowhere else to go. This is the story of how Finn Gallagher found something everyone else had given up on, and how that discovery didn't just save a life. It changed an entire town's understanding of what matters when everything seems to be falling apart. It's about an old horse that should have died alone, and a young boy who refused to let that happen. About how the weakest among us sometimes carry the greatest strength, and how hope can grow in the coldest season if someone is brave enough to tend it. Finn Gallagher had been living with his grandmother for 63 days when he found the horse. Not that he was counting, except he was. Every morning he woke in the small bedroom that used to be his father's, staring at wallpaper patterned with tiny boats that his dad must have looked at as a child, and Finn counted. 63 days since the accident. 63 days since his mother stopped being able to look at him without crying. 63 days since he'd been put on a bus with a duffel bag and sent to Millbrook Hollow to live with Nana Gallagher while his mother figured things out, whatever that meant. The town of Millbrook Hollow sat in a valley that tourists passed through on their way to somewhere better. The main street held a post office, a diner that Nana ran called Maggie's Place, a feed store, and a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left as if tired of pointing toward heaven. Finn's new school was a brick building that smelled like old cafeteria grease and floor wax, and he'd spent the first 2 months there perfecting the art of being invisible. He sat in the back. He spoke only when called on. He ate lunch alone near the windows where he could watch the hills and pretend he was somewhere else. On this particular morning, a Saturday, Nana had shooed him out of the diner after breakfast. "You need air," she'd said, not unkindly. "Go walk. Explore. This is your home now, Finn. Might as well get to know it." But it wasn't his home. His home was 300 miles west in a house he couldn't return to, with a mother who couldn't look at him and a father who would never look at anything again. So Finn walked. He followed Copper Creek as it bent away from town, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his breath coming out in small clouds. The path alongside the creek was overgrown, branches reaching across like fingers trying to hold hands. He'd been this way a few times before, always stopping when the trail met the edge of Thornhill Farm. The property had been abandoned for years, or so the kids at school said. Old Man Thornhill died and nobody wanted the place. The fences sagged. The barn roof had caved on one side. The farmhouse windows were dark and empty. But today Finn didn't stop. Something pulled him forward, a feeling he couldn't name. He ducked under the split rail fence and crossed into the field where dead grass crunched beneath his sneakers. The fog was lifting slightly, and that's when he saw it. At first, Finn thought it was a pile of snow that had somehow survived autumn, white against the brown grass, motionless. But snow didn't fall until December here, and as he moved closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made his chest go tight. A horse, white as chalk, lying on its side in the middle of the field. Finn stopped walking. His first instinct was to run, to pretend he hadn't seen it, because dead things scared him now in ways they hadn't before his father's funeral. But then the horse's ribcage moved, just slightly, a shallow rise and fall that said not dead, not yet. He approached slowly, the way you'd approach something fragile that might shatter if startled. The horse didn't lift its head. Its eyes were open but clouded, milky with age. Its coat, which might have been beautiful once, was matted and filthy, caked with mud and something darker. Every rib showed through the hide like the bars of a cage. The legs were tucked awkwardly beneath its body, and flies gathered around sores on its flanks despite the cold. Finn knelt in the grass a few feet away, his heart hammering. He'd never been this close to a horse before. He didn't know anything about horses except what he'd seen in movies. This one looked nothing like those. This one looked like something the world had chewed up and spit out, something too tired to even lift its head. "You're dying?" Finn whispered. The words came out before he could stop them, and hearing them spoken aloud made his throat ache. The horse's ear flickered toward his voice, the only acknowledgement that it had heard. Finn sat there for a long time, watching the labored breathing, watching the flies, watching the fog finish lifting to reveal a sky the color of old concrete. He thought about walking away. He thought about how his mother had sent him away because looking at him hurt too much. He thought about how his father had looked in the casket, peaceful, they'd said, but really just absent, just gone. He thought about how easy it was for the world to forget things, to let them slip away quietly where nobody had to watch. Then he stood up, brushed the dirt from his jeans and ran. He ran back through the field, under the fence, along the creek path, through town, his lungs burning, until he burst through the door of Maggie's place. The breakfast rush had ended and only a few stragglers remained, nursing coffee and reading newspapers. Nana looked up from wiping down the counter, her face creasing with concern. "Finn, what on earth?" "There's a horse," Finn gasped, doubling over to catch his breath. "Behind Thornhill Farm. It's dying. We have to help it." Nana came around the counter, her hand on his shoulder. "Slow down. What horse?" "An old white horse. It's just lying there. I think it's starving." The other customers had turned to listen. Old Mr. Henderson, who used to run the mill, shook his head slowly. "That'd be Cashin," he said. "Thoroughbred. Used to be a show jumper back when the Thornhills ran the stable. Must be close to 30 years old now." "Someone should call animal control," a woman said from a corner booth. "It's cruel to let it suffer." Finn's stomach dropped. Animal control. He knew what that meant. They'd come and they'd put the horse down and that would be that. Quick and merciful and over. Like everything else. "Can't we help it?" Finn asked, looking up at his grandmother. "Can't someone fix it?" Nana's expression softened in a way that made Finn's chest hurt worse. "Oh honey, if it's in the state you're describing, I don't think there's much anyone can do. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let suffering end. But nobody even tried," Finn said, and his voice cracked. Nobody even cared enough to try. The diner went quiet. Nana exchanged glances with Mr. Henderson, who cleared his throat and looked away. The truth was plain on everyone's faces. The horse had been forgotten, just like the mill, just like half the shops on Main Street, just like everything else in Millbrook Hollow that couldn't keep up with the way things were changing. "There's a vet," Mr. Henderson said finally. "Dr. Beatrice Thornton. She's retired now, but she used to care for all the horses around here. Lives out on Ridgeline Road. Might be willing to take a look, though I doubt she'll tell you anything different." Nana sighed, untying her apron. "All right, I'll close up early. Let's go see Dr. Thornton." They drove in Nana's old truck, Finn silent in the passenger seat, watching the trees blur past. Ridgeline Road climbed up out of the valley, where houses sat farther apart and mailboxes marked long driveways. Dr. Thornton's place was a small cottage with a barn out back and a wooden sign that read Thornton Veterinary Services. Retired. Dr. Beatrice Thornton answered the door. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In flannel and jeans, her silver hair pulled back in a braid. She was tall and lean, with the kind of hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime working. When Nana explained why they'd come, Dr. Thornton's face grew still. "Cashin," she repeated. "I haven't thought about that horse in years." "He's dying," Finn said, stepping forward. "Please, can you help him?" Dr. Thornton studied Finn for a long moment, her eyes the pale blue of winter sky. Then she grabbed a coat from a hook by the door. "Let's go see." The three of them drove back to Thornhill Farm in Dr. Thornton's truck, which smelled like leather and antiseptic. She didn't talk much on the drive, just asked Finn a few questions about what he'd seen. When they arrived, she grabbed a weathered bag from behind the seat and led the way across the field. The horse hadn't moved. Dr. Thornton approached without hesitation, kneeling beside the animal and setting her bag down. She ran her hands along the horse's neck, checking pulse and temperature, lifting the cloudy eyelids, examining the sores and the jutting ribs. Finn watched her face, trying to read the verdict before she spoke it. Finally, Dr. Thornton sat back on her heels. He's severely malnourished, dehydrated. Those sores are infected. He's got cataracts in both eyes, arthritis in his joints, and I'd wager his teeth are in terrible shape. She paused, her hand resting on the horse's neck. He's 28 years old, which is ancient for a horse. Most don't make it past 25. So he's going to die, Finn said flatly. Dr. Thornton looked at him. Everything dies eventually. But does he have to die now? Today? Like this? The vet's expression shifted, something softening around her eyes. No, not if someone's willing to do the work. It would take months of careful feeding, medical treatment, shelter. It would cost money. And even then, there's no guarantee. He's very far gone. I'll do it, Finn said immediately. I'll do the work. Finn, Nana started gently. I'll do it, he repeated, and his voice came out fierce in a way that surprised even him. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't let him die alone like this. Dr. Thornton was quiet for a long moment, her hand still on the horse's neck. Then she nodded slowly. All right, first thing we need to do is get him on his feet and into shelter. That barn over there looks mostly intact. We'll need blankets, water, feed. I'll make a list. Finn felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed tight since the accident. Relief, maybe, or purpose, or just the simple fact that someone had said yes. They worked through the afternoon. Dr. Thornton brought her truck around and they fashioned a sling to help the horse stand. It took 3 tries, Cashin's legs shaking so badly Finn thought they'd snap. But finally the old horse was upright, swaying but standing. They walked him slowly to the barn, one painful step at a time. Inside, Finn cleared a stall while Nana went to Blackwell's feed and supply for hay and grain. Dr. Thornton stayed with the horse, speaking to him in a low, steady voice as she cleaned the sores and started in 4 for fluids. Finn watched her work, memorizing everything. The way she moved her hands, the quiet authority in her voice, the way she treated Cashin not as something dying but as someone worth saving. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the barn's broken roof, Cashin stood in clean straw with a blanket over his back, slowly drinking water from a bucket. He looked no less skeletal, no less broken, but his eyes seemed slightly clearer, or maybe that was just what Finn wanted to see. Dr. Thornton packed up her supplies. I'll come back tomorrow morning. For now, he needs rest more than anything. She turned to Finn. You understand what you've taken on? This won't be easy. Most people would say it's not even worth trying. Finn looked at the white horse, at the rise and fall of his breathing, at the way his ears swiveled toward their voices. He thought about his father's funeral, about the closed casket, about his mother's tears, about the 63 days of silence. Maybe most people would say that, Finn replied quietly. But I'm not most people. Dr. Thornton smiled for the first time, a small but genuine expression. No, I don't suppose you are. She handed him a piece of paper covered in her neat handwriting. This is his feeding schedule. Small amounts, often. Too much too fast will kill him. I've also written down warning signs to watch for. I'll watch, Finn promised. That night, Finn slept in the barn. He told Nana he wanted to make sure Cashin was okay. But the truth was simpler than that. He didn't want the horse to be alone. He spread a sleeping bag in the stall next to Cashin's and lay listening to the old horse breathe, to the wind moving through the broken places in the roof, to the sound of Copper Creek in the distance. In the darkness, Finn whispered to the horse things he hadn't been able to say to anyone else. About how the accident hadn't been his fault but felt like it anyway. About how his mother couldn't stand to see him because he had his father's eyes. About how he was supposed to have been in the car that day but had stayed home sick. About how surviving felt less like luck and more like punishment. Cashin shifted in his stall, and Finn heard the soft sound of the horse lowering himself carefully into the straw. For a creature that had been left to die, he settled with surprising trust, as if he understood that this barn, this boy, meant safety. Finn closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him under. Tomorrow he would start the real work. Tomorrow he would learn how to save something the world had given up on. Tomorrow he would prove that even when everything seemed broken beyond repair, even when loss felt like the only truth left, there was still room for something else. There was still room for hope. The first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and small victories that felt monumental. Finn moved through his days with a single-minded focus that surprised everyone, including himself. He woke before dawn each morning, dressed in the dark of his grandmother's house, and walked the 1.5 miles to Thornhill Farm while frost still glittered on the grass. By the time the sun broke over the hills, he was already in the barn, measuring out Cashin's first feeding of the day. Dr. Thornton had been explicit in her instructions. The horse's stomach had shrunk from starvation, and overfeeding would cause colic that could kill him as surely as neglect had nearly done. So Finn fed him small portions of soaked hay pellets mixed with senior feed, waiting the prescribed 2 hours before offering the next meal. 6 times a day. Every day. No exceptions. The work was harder than Finn had imagined. Cashin could barely chew, his teeth worn down to nubs that made eating painful. Finn learned to soak the feed until it was nearly mush, learned to wait patiently while the old horse took his time, learned not to flinch when Cashin's lips pulled back to reveal the damaged teeth and inflamed gums. Dr. Thornton came every morning that first week, checking vitals, cleaning wounds, adjusting medications. She worked with an efficiency born of decades, but Finn noticed how her hands lingered on Cashin's neck, how her voice softened when she spoke to him. On the 3rd day, while Dr. Thornton was wrapping new bandages around an infected sore on Cashin's hindquarters, Finn finally asked the question that had been building in his chest. Why did they leave him out here to die? Dr. Thornton didn't look up from her work, but her hands stilled for a moment. The Thornhills bred show jumpers. When I first started practicing, this farm was the pride of the valley. Cashin was their star. Won championships 3 years running. But the family fell on hard times like everyone else around here. They sold off the other horses, tried to keep the farm going, but eventually they just couldn't. Old man Thornhill died 5 years ago. His daughter inherited the property, but she lives in Charlotte now, married to a banker. She hasn't been back since the funeral. But somebody had to know Cashin was still here. Dr. Thornton secured the bandage and stood, brushing straw from her knees. Knowing and caring are different things. People assume someone else is handling it. Or they convince themselves the situation isn't as bad as it looks. Or they decide it's not their problem. She met Finn's eyes. It's easier to look away than to take responsibility for something hard. That's awful, Finn said quietly. Dr. Thornton gathered her supplies. Yes, it is. But you didn't look away. That matters. Nana brought lunch to the barn each afternoon. Sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and thermoses of soup that steamed when Finn unscrewed the lid. She never stayed long, always had to get back to the diner. But she'd pause to scratch Cashin's forehead and tell Finn he was doing good work. On the 4th day, she brought someone with her. This is Mr. Yamada, Nana said, gesturing to a compact man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands stained with wood dust. He teaches shop at your school. I told him what you're doing out here. Mr. Yamada stepped into the barn, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. He studied the broken stall doors, the gaps in the walls where wind whistled through, the tarp Finn had rigged over the section of collapsed roof. Then he looked at Cashin, at the horse standing with his head lowered, at the visible ribs still too prominent despite a week of careful feeding. Your grandmother tells me you've been sleeping out here, Mr. Yamada said. Finn nodded. Just until he's stronger. I don't want him to be alone if something happens. Mr. Yamada walked the perimeter of the barn, testing boards with his foot, examining joints and supports. The structure is sound enough, he said finally. But it needs work. Winter's coming hard this year. You'll need those walls sealed, that roof patched properly, a door that closes tight. I don't have money for materials, Finn admitted. Mr. Yamada pushed his glasses up his nose. I have scrap wood from projects. And I have students who need to learn how to build things that matter. He turned to face Finn. We'll come on Saturday. Bring tools and supplies. You can help learn as we work. Finn felt his throat go tight. Why would you do that? Mr. Yamada glanced at Cashin, then back at Finn. Because someone should have done it years ago. And because I think you understand something most people forget. Nothing worth saving is easy to save. That Saturday, Mr. Yamada arrived with 3 students from his advanced shop class and a truck bed full of lumber, nails, and tools. Finn recognized one of the students from school, a senior named Lucas who'd never spoken to him. The other 2 were younger, a pair of twin girls who worked with synchronized efficiency that suggested years of practice. They worked through the morning, Mr. Yamada directing while the students measured and cut and hammered. Finn helped where he could, holding board steady, fetching tools, learning the names of things he'd never paid attention to before. Cashin watched from his stall, ears swiveling toward each new sound. By afternoon, the gaps in the walls were sealed, the roof had a new patch of corrugated metal, and a solid door hung on repaired hinges. Lucas stood back, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Looks almost respectable now. One of the twins, Finn learned her name was Sophie, approached Cashin's stall cautiously. Can I pet him? Finn nodded. He's gentle. Just move slow. Sophie reached through the slats and laid her hand on Cashin's nose. The horse didn't pull away, just stood there accepting the touch with patient stillness. My mom used to ride, Sophie said softly, before she got sick. She always said horses could tell when you were sad. Her sister, Emma, joined her at the stall. They stood there together, hands on the white horse, and Finn saw something shift in their faces. A softening, a recognition. Mr. Yamada came to stand beside Finn, his voice low. People need this. They just don't always know it. He gestured toward the students. Lucas's father lost his job when the mill closed. The twins' mother has cancer. Everyone in this valley is carrying something heavy. Sometimes helping someone else carry their burden makes your own feel lighter. That night, after everyone had left and Finn was settling into his sleeping bag, he heard footsteps outside the barn. He tensed, then relaxed when Dr. Thornton appeared in the doorway carrying a camping lantern. Thought you might want better light than that flashlight, she said, setting the lantern on a hay bale. She settled onto an upturned bucket, her movements careful in the way of someone whose joints ached in the cold. I heard Yamada and his crew were here today. They fixed everything, Finn said. The barn's actually warm now. Dr. Thornton smiled. This town forgets sometimes, but there's still good people here. You reminded them of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Cashin shift in his stall. Finally, Dr. Thornton spoke again. I need to tell you something, Finn, about what comes next. Finn's stomach clenched. Is he getting worse? No. Actually, he's stabilizing better than I expected. But getting him to survive isn't the same as getting him to thrive. He's got months of recovery ahead, maybe longer. And even then, he'll never be what he was. The arthritis alone means he'll always move with pain. The cataracts aren't operable at his age. He's a 28-year-old horse with a body that's been through trauma. Quality of life becomes the question. What kind of question? Dr. Thornton met his eyes. The question of whether surviving is enough, or whether he needs something more. A reason to keep going beyond just existing. He has a reason, Finn said firmly. I found him. I'm taking care of him. Dr. Thornton nodded slowly. You are. But you're 11 years old. Finn. You can't be here every hour of every day forever. Eventually you'll go back to your regular life. What happens to Cashin then? The question hit harder than Finn wanted to admit. He'd been so focused on keeping the horse alive that he hadn't thought past the immediate crisis. What did happen next? School had started again after Thanksgiving break, and Nana had been lenient about letting him come out early and stay late. But how long could that last? And what about when winter truly set in, when snow made the walk dangerous? I don't know, Finn admitted quietly, but I'll figure it out. Dr. Thornton stood, joints creaking. I know you will. Just wanted you to think about it. She paused at the barn door. You know, I retired because I got tired of losing animals I couldn't save. After a while, it wears you down. But watching you with Cashin, it reminds me why I became a vet in the first place. Not everything can be saved, but the ones that can are worth every bit of effort. After she left, Finn lay in his sleeping bag staring at the barn's new roof, solid and whole above him. He thought about Dr. Thornton's question. What happened next? What happened when the immediate crisis passed and reality set back in? He didn't have answers, but lying there in the dark with Cashin's steady breathing filling the silence, Finn made himself a promise. He'd found this horse when everyone else had looked away. He'd chosen to try when everyone said it was hopeless. And whatever came next, whatever challenges waited beyond this moment, he wouldn't give up. Because maybe Mr. Yamada was right. Maybe nothing worth saving was easy to save. But that didn't mean it wasn't worth doing. The following Monday, Finn returned to school with sawdust still under his fingernails and exhaustion pressing behind his eyes. He'd barely slept, too worried about leaving Cashin alone overnight, too aware of everything that could go wrong. In homeroom, his teacher, Mrs. Palmer, asked if he was feeling all right. He nodded and said he was fine, which was mostly true. He was tired, yes, but fine felt more accurate than it had in the 69 days since the accident. At lunch, Finn took his usual spot by the windows, unpacking the sandwich Nana had made. He was halfway through eating when Sophie and Emma appeared at his table. "Can we sit?" Sophie asked. Finn nodded, surprised. The twins settled across from him, their lunches spread between them. "We told some people about the horse," Emma said. "About what you're doing." Finn tensed. "I'm not trying to make it a big thing." Sophie shook her head. "It's not like that. We just thought maybe other people would want to help." She pulled out her phone and showed Finn a photo. It was Cashin, taken through the stall slats, his white face partially visible. Underneath, she'd written a simple caption. "Sometimes the bravest thing is to care when everyone else has stopped." The post had 37 likes. "My friend Iris saw it," Emma said. "She's in 4th grade, doesn't really talk much since her sister got hurt. But she drew this." Emma pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack and smoothed it out on the table. The drawing was done in colored pencil, simple but striking. It showed a white horse and a small figure standing together, and above them, in careful letters, a single word: hope. Finn stared at the drawing, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. "Can I keep this?" Emma pushed it toward him. "Iris wanted you to have it. She said maybe you could show it to the horse." That afternoon, Finn taped Iris's drawing to the wall of Cashin's stall, right where the horse could see it when he lifted his head. The white horse studied it with his clouded eyes, and Finn told him what it meant. That somewhere in town, a little girl who didn't speak much had seen his picture and cared enough to draw him something beautiful. That he mattered to people who'd never even met him. Cashin exhaled softly, his breath warm against Finn's hand. And Finn felt the first stirrings of something he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. This wasn't just about saving a horse anymore. It was becoming something bigger. Something that reached beyond the barn and touched people who needed to believe that caring still mattered, that trying still counted, that even in a town that felt like it was slowly dying, there was still room for hope to take root. Dr. Thornton arrived for her evening check with a thoughtful expression. She'd heard about the social media post, about the drawing, about the way word was spreading through town. As she checked Cashin's vitals, she spoke without looking at Finn. "People are starting to pay attention. That's good. But it also means Preston Vale will notice soon, if he hasn't already." "Who's Preston Vale?" Dr. Thornton's jaw tightened. "Developer from Richmond. He's been buying up properties in the valley, trying to assemble parcels for a commercial development. Strip mall, chain restaurants, that sort of thing. Thornhill Farm is right in the middle of his target area." "What does that have to do with Cashin?" "Everything. The property can't be sold easily with a horse on it, especially one requiring medical care. Vale's been pressuring the Thornhill daughter to let him take care of the problem. Now that people are watching, it complicates things for him." Finn felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Take care of the problem. He knew what that meant. Dr. Thornton must have seen something in his face because her voice gentled. "Don't borrow trouble. Just be aware that this might not stay simple." Sometimes when you shine a light on something people wanted to stay hidden, they push back. But we're not doing anything wrong. No, you're not. But right and wrong don't always matter when money's involved. She closed her medical bag. Just stay focused on Cashin. Let me worry about Preston Vale. That night, as Finn settled into his sleeping bag, he found himself thinking about all the people who'd become part of this in just a week. Dr. Thornton with her steady hands and decades of knowledge. Mr. Yamada and his students who'd given up their Saturday to repair a barn for a horse they'd never met. Sophie and Emma spreading the word. Iris drawing hope on paper. Nana bringing food and quiet encouragement. And Cashin himself, who'd somehow survived being abandoned, who stood a little steadier each day, who'd accepted Finn's help with a trust that felt both humbling and terrifying. The old horse was sleeping now, lying down in clean straw, his breathing deep and even. The new roof held back the wind. The sealed walls kept the cold at bay. The lantern Dr. Thornton had brought cast warm light across the barn. Finn closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the distance, Copper Creek continued its patient journey through the valley. Above, stars wheeled through their ancient patterns. And here, in this barn on abandoned property in a town that felt forgotten, a boy and a horse rested together. Both of them a little less alone than they'd been a week ago. Both of them learning that sometimes being saved and saving someone else were the same thing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, that was enough. December arrived with a cold that settled into the valley like something permanent. Frost turned the world silver each morning, and Finn's breath came in clouds as he made his daily walk to Thornhill Farm. The path along Copper Creek had become so familiar he could navigate it half asleep, which was fortunate because most mornings that's exactly what he was doing. His body had adapted to the routine with an efficiency that surprised him. Wake at 5, dress in layers, walk in darkness, arrive as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern hills. Cashin had learned the schedule too. By the time Finn's footsteps sounded on the gravel outside the barn, the old horse would be standing at his stall gate, ears forward, waiting. It was a small thing, that anticipation, but it meant everything. 3 weeks ago Cashin had been too weak to stand without help. Now he greeted each day on his own 4 legs, ready for breakfast, ready for whatever the hours would bring. The feeding routine had become almost meditative. Finn would measure the soaked pellets and senior feed with careful precision, the same amounts Dr. Thornton had prescribed, checking his watch between servings to ensure the proper spacing. While Cashin ate, Finn cleaned the stall, forking soiled straw into a wheelbarrow and spreading fresh bedding. The work was physical and repetitive, and Finn found comfort in that. It left no room for thoughts that spiraled into dark places, no space for memories of hospital waiting rooms, or closed caskets, or his mother's hollow eyes. Dr. Thornton still came 3 times a week, though her visits had shifted from urgent medical interventions to routine monitoring. She taught Finn how to check Cashin's temperature, how to feel for dehydration by pinching the skin on his neck, how to recognize the subtle signs of colic or distress. Finn absorbed everything with an intensity that reminded Dr. Thornton of herself at that age, back when she decided she wanted to spend her life helping animals. One morning, while Finn was carefully applying ointment to a healing sore on Cashin's shoulder, Dr. Thornton watched with her arms crossed, her expression thoughtful. "You've got gentle hands," she observed. "Most kids your age would rush through this." Finn kept his eyes on his work. "If I rush, I might hurt him." Dr. Thornton smiled. "That's the right instinct. Too many people think force and speed show strength. Really, it's patience and attention that matter most." She moved closer, checking Finn's technique. "You ever think about becoming a vet?" The question caught Finn off guard. He'd never thought about what he wanted to be. Before the accident, he'd had vague notions about maybe being an engineer like his father, but those dreams felt like they belonged to a different person now. The boy who'd existed before had been interested in building things. The boy he was becoming cared more about healing what was broken. "Maybe," Finn said quietly. "I don't know if I'm smart enough." Dr. Thornton snorted. "Intelligence isn't the barrier. Half the vets I went to school with were brilliant idiots. Book smart but couldn't read an animal's body language to save their lives. What matters is whether you can pay attention, whether you can stay calm in crisis, and whether you actually care. You've got all three. The words settled into Finn like seeds finding soil. He'd spent the past months feeling like he was stumbling through darkness, reacting rather than choosing, surviving rather than living. But maybe that was changing. Maybe purpose looked like this. Showing up every day, doing the work, caring even when caring was hard. School had become the interruption between morning and afternoon barn sessions. Finn attended classes with his body while his mind remained at Thornhill Farm, calculating feeding schedules and worrying about weather. His teachers noticed his distraction but said nothing. His grades had always been solid, and if he seemed distant, well, everyone knew about his father. People made allowances for grief. But something unexpected began happening in the cafeteria. The table by the windows where Finn had spent 2 months eating alone started filling up. First Sophie and Emma, then Lucas from shop class, then others. They'd ask about Cashin, and Finn would tell them how much weight the horse had gained, how his coat was starting to look less dull, how he'd nickered that morning when Finn arrived, a sound that felt like conversation. The stories spread. Teachers heard them in passing. Parents heard them at dinner tables. That boy living with Maggie Gallagher, the one whose father died, he's saving an old horse out at the Thornhill place. Did you hear? He sleeps in the barn. Walks there every morning before school. The horse was nearly dead when he found it, and now it's recovering. Can you imagine? 11 years old and taking on something like that. Millbrook Hollow was a small town, and small towns ran on stories. For years, the stories had all been about loss. The mill closing, families moving away, downtown businesses shuttering, young people leaving and never coming back. But now there was a different story circulating, one about a boy and a horse and the stubborn refusal to accept that some things were too broken to fix. On a Saturday morning 2 weeks before Christmas, Finn arrived at the barn to find he wasn't alone. Iris Kowalski stood outside the barn door with her mother, clutching a folder to her chest. Finn recognized her from the drawing she'd made, the one still taped to Cashin's stall. She was small for 9, with dark hair pulled into braids and eyes that seemed too solemn for her age. Iris wanted to meet Cashin, her mother explained. She's been drawing him every day since she saw that first picture. I hope it's all right that we came. Finn nodded, suddenly shy. It's okay. He's probably awake. They entered the barn together, and Cashin lifted his head at the sound of multiple footsteps. Iris stopped several feet away, her folder held like a shield. Finn could see her trembling slightly. He won't hurt you, Finn said gently. He's really calm. You want to give him a carrot? Iris looked at her mother, who produced a bag of carrots from her coat pocket. Finn took one and showed Iris how to hold it flat on her palm, fingers together so Cashin's teeth wouldn't accidentally catch skin. He led her slowly to the stall gate. Cashin watched them approach with his clouded eyes, patient and still. When Iris extended her shaking hand, the old horse lowered his head and delicately took the carrot, his lips soft against her palm. Iris gasped, then smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, but it transformed her face. She opened her folder and pulled out drawings, dozens of them. Cashin in different poses. Cashin with stars above him. Cashin with flowers growing around his hooves. Cashin with wings. Each one was carefully rendered, showing hours of work. These are incredible, Finn said, meaning it. Iris's mother touched her daughter's shoulder. Iris doesn't talk much anymore. Not since her sister's accident. But she draws. The therapist says it's her way of processing feelings. Finn felt a jolt of recognition. He knew about accidents, about the weight of silence that followed them. He looked at Iris, really looked at her, and saw something familiar in her solemn eyes. She was carrying her own heavy thing just like he was. Would you want to help me with Cashin sometimes? Finn asked. I could teach you how to brush him, how to check his water, stuff like that. Iris looked up at her mother, hope flickering across her face. Her mother hesitated, clearly weighing the request. It's a lot of responsibility, she said carefully. I'll be here the whole time, Finn promised. And Dr. Thornton comes by a lot. She could teach Iris things too. Iris tugged her mother's sleeve, her expression pleading. Finally, her mother nodded. Weekends only. And you do exactly what Finn tells you. Iris threw her arms around her mother's waist. The first real display of emotion Finn had seen from her. When she pulled back, she walked straight to Cashin's stall and pressed her forehead against the gate. The horse lowered his head until their foreheads nearly touched, and they stood that way for a long moment, silent communication passing between girl and horse. Finn felt his throat tighten. He'd thought he was saving Cashin alone, but now he understood. The old horse was becoming something bigger than one boy's rescue project. He was becoming a bridge between broken things, a living reminder that survival was possible, that gentleness still existed, that caring still mattered. That afternoon, Iris stayed for hours. Finn taught her how to mix the feed, how to approach Cashin slowly from the side where he could see her coming despite his cataracts, how to use a soft brush on the places that weren't injured. She worked with careful intensity, checking with Finn before each action, and when she finally left, she turned back 3 times to wave at the horse. After they'd gone, Dr. Thornton arrived for her scheduled check. She'd heard about the visit from someone in town, news traveling at its usual speed. As she examined Cashin, she spoke thoughtfully. "You're building something here. You know that? I'm just taking care of a horse." Dr. Thornton gave him a look. "You're doing more than that. Whether you mean to or not, you're giving people something to believe in. That's powerful. It's also complicated." "What do you mean?" She finished her examination and made notes in the small book she carried. When people start believing in something, they develop expectations. They want the story to have a happy ending. But real life doesn't always work that way. Cashin's doing better, much better than I expected, but he's still a very old horse with significant health issues. There will be setbacks, maybe major ones. When that happens, people might feel betrayed, like you failed them. But I'm not doing this for them. I know, but they don't see it that way anymore. That's the weight that comes with shining a light on something. People gather around the light, and then they need it to keep burning. Finn absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle uncomfortably. He'd wanted to save Cashin because leaving him to die felt wrong. He hadn't thought about audiences or expectations or the pressure of other people's hopes. Now those things existed whether he'd asked for them or not. "What should I do?" he asked. Dr. Thornton packed her supplies. "Same thing you've been doing. Show up. Do the work. Be honest about what's possible and what isn't. And don't let other people's needs change why you're here." She paused at the barn door. "You're here because you care about this horse. Keep that at the center and the rest will work itself out." After she left, Finn sat in the straw beside Cashin's stall, watching the old horse rest. The white coat was cleaner now, brushed daily until it almost glowed in the dim barn light. The ribs were still visible but less prominent, flesh slowly rebuilding over the skeletal frame. The sores had healed to pink scars. The clouded eyes would never clear, but they held alertness now instead of the glazed exhaustion of those first days. Progress. Real, measurable progress. And yet Dr. Thornton's words lingered. There will be setbacks. Maybe major ones. Finn knew about setbacks. His father had been fine one morning, laughing over breakfast, teasing Finn about sleeping late. For hours later he was gone, his car crushed by a semi that had jackknifed it on black ice. No warning, no chance to prepare. Just there one moment and absent the next, leaving a hole so vast that Finn still couldn't see the edges of it. He'd learned that loving something meant accepting it could be taken away, that caring made you vulnerable, that trying to save something didn't guarantee success. But he'd also learned something else in this barn over the past weeks. That vulnerability was where courage lived. That caring, even when it hurt, was what made you human. That trying mattered even if failing was possible. Cashin shifted in his stall, and Finn reached through the slats to rest his hand on the horse's shoulder. The warmth of living flesh, the steady rise and fall of breathing, the simple fact of presence. These things weren't guarantees. They were gifts, temporary and precious. "I don't know what happens next," Finn whispered. "I don't know if you'll keep getting better or if something will go wrong. But I'm glad I found you. Even if it's hard. Even if it hurts. I'm glad." The horse exhaled softly, warm breath clouding the cold air. Outside, afternoon was fading into evening. Soon Nana would arrive with dinner, and Finn would eat while telling her about Iris's visit, about the drawings now decorating Cashin's stall like a gallery. Later, he'd settle into his sleeping bag while Cashin dozed, and the barn would fill with the quiet sounds of night. But right now, in this moment, Finn simply sat with his hand on the old horse's shoulder, feeling the proof of survival beneath his palm. Both of them still here, both of them still trying, both of them learning that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was keep showing up, day after day, even when the outcome remained uncertain. The routine continued through the darkest weeks of December. Wake, walk, feed, clean, attend school, return, feed again, evening care, sleep. The rhythm became as natural as breathing. Finn's body adapted to the physical demands until hauling water and lifting hay bales felt ordinary instead of exhausting. His hands grew calloused in new places. His shoulders broadened slightly from the work. He moved through the world differently, with purpose animating each step. And Cashin continued to improve. Slowly, stubbornly, against odds that had seemed impossible that first day in the field. His weight crept up 5 pounds, then 10, then 15. His coat regained some luster. The sores healed completely. He began moving with less stiffness, the arthritis still present but managed with medication and gentle exercise. Dr. Thornton started bringing Iris with her on weekend visits, teaching the girl basic veterinary care while Finn watched and learned alongside her. Iris never spoke during these lessons, but her attention was absolute. She absorbed every word, every demonstration, her hands growing confident as she learned to wrap bandages and check vitals. One Sunday afternoon, while Iris was carefully brushing Cashin's mane, the girl suddenly hummed. It was quiet, barely audible, but her mother heard it from where she stood by the barn door. Tears sprang to her eyes. Finn saw her press a hand to her mouth, saw the way she had to turn away to compose herself. Later, as they were leaving, Iris's mother pulled Finn aside. She hasn't made a sound in 8 months. Not since the accident. Her sister was driving. They hit a patch of ice. Her sister lived, but she's paralyzed now. Iris hasn't spoken since they told her. The mother's voice broke slightly. What you're doing here with Cashin, it's helping her in ways therapy hasn't. Thank you. Finn didn't know what to say to that. He was just taking care of a horse. But looking at Iris, at the way she stood beside Cashin with her small hand on his neck, at the peace that had settled over her face, he understood. Sometimes healing worked in unexpected ways. Sometimes saving one thing helped save others too. As Christmas approached, the barn had become a gathering place. Sophie and Emma came after school to help with evening feeding. Lucas stopped by with Mr. Yamada to reinforce the stall gates and add insulation to the walls. Dr. Thornton's visits stretched longer, her professional demeanor softening into something that looked like affection. And people brought gifts, carrots and apples for Cashin, a warm jacket for Finn, a space heater for the barn, a better sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, bags of feed that mysteriously appeared outside the barn door. The town was taking care of them in small, quiet ways, investing in this story of recovery and hope. On Christmas Eve, Nana insisted Finn come home for dinner. He'd been sleeping at the barn for nearly a month straight, and while she'd allowed it, she drew the line at him spending Christmas alone. Finn agreed reluctantly, but only after setting up a baby monitor in Cashin's stall so he could hear if the horse became distressed. Dinner was simple, just the two of them at Nana's small table, but the food was warm and the house smelled like pine from the small tree she'd decorated. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Nana brought out a box wrapped in newspaper comics. "Your father made this," she said softly, "when he was about your age. I've been saving it, wasn't sure when would be the right time." Finn unwrapped the box with trembling hands. Inside was a wooden carving of a horse, small enough to fit in his palm, every detail rendered with obvious care. The mane flowed in an invisible wind. The legs were caught mid-stride. The face turned slightly, as if looking back at something precious. "He loved horses," Nana said. "Did you know that? Before your grandfather died, we had a small place outside of town. Had 2 horses he used to ride every day. After we lost the property and moved here, he never talked about it. But I think he missed them his whole life. Finn held the carving, feeling the smooth wood worn soft by decades. He'd never known this about his father. Had never known there was a history of loving horses in his family. The discovery felt like a gift that transcended the physical object, a connection reaching across death to touch him here in the present. Maybe that's why you found Cashin, Nana said. Maybe some things run in families deeper than we know. That night, back in the barn with the carved horse tucked in his jacket pocket, Finn told Cashin about his father, about the accident and the funeral and the silence that followed, about living with grief that felt too large to carry, about finding the old white horse and choosing to try when trying seemed hopeless. Cashin listened the way horses do, present and patient, his breathing steady in the darkness. And Finn felt something shift in his chest, some small easing of the weight he'd been carrying. He wasn't healed. Grief didn't work that way, but he was learning to carry it differently, to find purpose alongside the pain, to understand that loving things meant risking loss but that risk was worth taking. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real accumulation of winter. It drifted down through the darkness, covering the valley in white, muffling sound until the world felt wrapped in silence. In the barn, boy and horse rested together, warm despite the cold, safe despite uncertainty, healing in the only way that mattered, by showing up, by trying, by refusing to give up on each other. January brought a cold so fierce it seemed to have teeth. The temperature plummeted below zero for 5 straight nights, and frost etched intricate patterns on the barn's windows. Finn woke each morning in his sleeping bag with ice crystals on the fabric near his face where his breath had frozen. The space heater Lucas had installed kept the barn tolerable but not truly warm, and Finn learned to dress in so many layers he felt like a walking pile of laundry. Cashin handled the cold better than Finn expected. Dr. Thornton had fitted him with 2 heavy blankets that strapped across his chest and belly, and the old horse seemed content to spend his days dozing in deep straw, conserving energy. His weight had stabilized at a healthier level, though he'd never be plump. The prominent hip bones and visible ribs were permanent features of his aged body, but now they were covered with enough flesh that he no longer looked like death waiting to happen. On a Wednesday afternoon when school let out early for teacher meetings, Finn arrived at the barn to find a black SUV parked near the entrance. A man in an expensive coat stood examining the property with a measuring gaze that made Finn's stomach clench. He was tall and polished, with silver hair styled precisely and shoes that had never touched barn mud. The man turned as Finn approached, his smile practiced and empty. "You must be Finn Gallagher. I've heard quite a bit about you." Finn stopped several feet away, his hand tightening on his backpack strap. "Who are you?" "Preston Vale. I'm a developer working on a project in this area." He gestured toward the barn with casual authority. "Impressive what you've done here. Very heartwarming. But I'm afraid this property is scheduled for acquisition, which means the horse will need to be relocated." The words hit like a physical blow. Finn felt his face flush hot despite the cold. "You can't just take him. He's getting better. He needs to stay here." Vale's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes were calculating. "I understand your attachment, but this isn't a matter of sentiment. The property owner has agreed to sell. Development begins in March. The horse can be moved to a sanctuary or, if his condition warrants it, humanely euthanized. Either way, he can't remain here. He's not just a condition," Finn said, his voice rising. "His name is Cashin, and people care about him. Lots of people." Vale's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm aware of the social media presence. Very touching. But emotional attachment doesn't change legal realities. This property will be cleared for development whether the horse is here or not. I'm simply trying to resolve the situation efficiently." "You mean you want him gone before people notice?" Finn shot back. "Before anyone can stop you." Something flickered in Vale's eyes, a flash of annoyance quickly masked. "I've been very patient with this situation out of respect for community sentiment. But patience has limits. You have until March 1st to make arrangements. After that, the county will handle it." He walked to his SUV, pausing before getting in. You should be proud of yourself, really. You gave an old horse a few extra months. That's more than most would have done. But all things end, son. Better to accept that gracefully. The SUV pulled away, leaving Finn standing alone in the cold with fury and fear warring in his chest. He stumbled into the barn where Cashin was already awake, ears pricked toward the sound of raised voices. Finn wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, pressing his face into the warm coat. "I won't let them take you," he whispered fiercely. "I won't." But even as he said it, Finn felt the weight of Vale's words. Legal realities, property rights, development schedules. What could an 11-year-old boy do against all that? He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Dr. Thornton. She answered on the second ring, and Finn poured out the story of Vale's visit in a rush of words that tumbled over each other. When he finished, silence stretched on the other end for several long seconds. "I was afraid of this," Dr. Thornton said finally. "Vale's been buying property aggressively. He's got investors, lawyers, connections at the county level. Fighting him head-on is nearly impossible. So we just give up?" Finn's voice cracked. "We just let him take Cashin?" "I didn't say that." Dr. Thornton's voice took on a steel quality Finn hadn't heard before. "I said fighting him head-on is nearly impossible. But there are other ways to fight. Meet me at St. Margaret's Community Hall tomorrow evening at 7. And bring Iris if her mother will allow it. We're gonna need everyone who cares about Cashin." That night, Finn barely slept. He lay in his sleeping bag staring at the barn's ceiling while his mind spun through scenarios, each one ending with Cashin being loaded into a trailer and taken away. By the time dawn came, his eyes burned with exhaustion and his stomach churned with anxiety. School was torture. Finn couldn't focus on anything. Teachers spoke, but their words were meaningless noise. At lunch, Sophie and Emma found him staring at an untouched sandwich. "We heard about Vale," Sophie said quietly, sliding into the seat across from him. "Lucas's mom works at the county office. She said Vale's been filing permits." Finn looked up at her, feeling hollow. "Dr. Thornton wants everyone at the community hall tonight. I don't know what she's planning." Emma leaned forward. "Whatever it is, we'll be there. And we'll bring people. This town needs something to believe in. Maybe fighting for Cashin is it." That evening, Finn walked to St. Margaret's Community Hall with Nana beside him. The building was old, used mostly for church suppers and town meetings, with folding chairs and a small stage at one end. Finn expected maybe a dozen people. Instead, he found the hall packed. Families filled the chairs and lined the walls. He recognized faces from the diner, from school, from around town. Sophie and Emma sat with their parents. Lucas stood with Mr. Yamada near the back. Iris was there with her mother, clutching a folder of drawings. Even some people Finn had never seen before had come, drawn by the story that had spread through Millbrook Hollow like wildfire. Dr. Thornton stood on the stage beside Reverend Paula Oakes, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an unshakable presence. When the murmuring crowd finally settled, Reverend Oakes spoke first. "We've gathered tonight because Preston Vale has given us a deadline. March 1st, the Thornhill property will be cleared for development. That gives us less than 2 months to find a solution." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "But before we talk strategy, I think we need to remember why we're here. This isn't just about a horse. It's about what kind of town we want to be." Dr. Thornton stepped forward then, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. 3 months ago, an 11-year-old boy found a dying horse that everyone else had ignored. Instead of walking away, he chose to try. He's shown up every single day since, in freezing cold and exhaustion, because he believed that life was worth saving. That kind of commitment reminds us of something we've forgotten. That caring still matters. That effort still counts. That we don't have to accept loss just because it seems inevitable. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Dr. Thornton continued. "Preston Vale thinks he can buy this valley piece by piece until there's nothing left but strip malls and chain restaurants. Maybe he's right. Maybe that's the future. But maybe we have a choice about what we preserve and what we let go." "What can we do, though?" Someone called from the crowd. "He owns the property. He's got lawyers. We can't stop the sale," Dr. Thornton admitted. But we can make a different offer. What if we raised enough money to buy the property ourselves? Turn it into a community space, a sanctuary not just for Cashin but for other animals that need refuge. A place where kids like Finn and Iris can learn about caring for creatures that need help. The hall erupted in discussion. People calling out questions, concerns, possibilities. How much money? Who would manage it? What about insurance and liability? The practical obstacles piled up quickly, threatening to crush the idea before it could take root. Then Iris stood up. Her mother tried to pull her back down, but Iris shook her off and walked to the front of the hall. She was so small on that stage, a 9-year-old girl who hadn't spoken in 8 months. The crowd fell silent, watching. Iris opened her folder and held up her drawings one by one. Cashin in different poses. The white horse with children gathered around him. The barn transformed into something beautiful and welcoming. Each image showed hours of careful work, a child's vision of hope made visible. Then, in a voice that shook but carried, Iris spoke her first words since her sister's accident. He taught me it's okay to be broken. We can still be loved. The silence that followed was profound. Iris's mother had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Finn felt his own eyes burning. Around the hall, people were visibly moved, many wiping at their eyes. Reverend Oakes moved to stand beside Iris, her hand gentle on the girl's shoulder. I think that answers the question of whether this matters. She looked out at the crowd. I'm making the first donation. $500 toward buying the property. Who else will invest in giving this community something to believe in? Hands went up across the hall. Mr. Yamada pledged $1,000. Sophie and Emma's parents pledged $500 together. Lucas's mother stood and said the Mill Workers Union would contribute $2,000. Person after person committed money, some offering hundreds, others just $20 or $50. Whatever they could spare. Dr. Thornton kept track on a whiteboard, the numbers climbing. By the end of the evening, they'd raised $18,000 in pledges. It wasn't enough to buy the property outright, Dr. Thornton admitted, but it was a start. And there were other avenues to explore. Grants from conservation organizations, nonprofit status that could unlock funding, partnerships with educational institutions. Committee formed that night. Dr. Thornton would lead it, along with Reverend Oakes, Mr. Yamada, and several others with legal or fundraising experience. They had 7 weeks to make it happen. 7 weeks to transform pledges into reality, to navigate bureaucracy and negotiate with property owners, to prove that a town could choose preservation over profit. Finn left the hall feeling something he hadn't felt since finding Cashin in that field. Not just hope, but possibility. The kind that came from seeing people choose to care, to fight for something beyond their immediate self-interest, to invest in a future that included beauty and compassion instead of just efficiency and commerce. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The committee met twice a week at the community hall, strategizing and organizing. Sophie started a crowdfunding campaign online that spread beyond Millbrook Hollow to neighboring towns and eventually across the state. Local newspapers picked up the story. A Richmond TV station sent a crew to interview Finn and film Cashin. The attention was overwhelming. Finn found himself explaining again and again why he'd chosen to help the old horse, searching for words to capture something that felt too big for language. Because he needed someone. Because I couldn't walk away. Because caring about things is what makes us human. The answers felt inadequate, but people responded to them anyway. Donations trickling in from strangers who'd seen the story and wanted to be part of something good. Vale pushed back, of course. He filed complaints with the county about unsafe conditions at the barn. He sent letters threatening legal action if the property wasn't vacated by the deadline. He gave interviews to business publications about the economic importance of development, painting the sanctuary efforts as naive sentimentality standing in the way of progress. But for every move Vale made, the community countered. The county inspector who came to examine the barn found everything up to code thanks to Mr. Yamada's repairs. A lawyer from Richmond offered pro bono services to navigate the legal complexities. Reverend Oakes organized a letter-writing campaign to county supervisors about the value of preservation. Through it all, Finn maintained his routine. Wake before dawn. Walk to the barn. care for Cashin. The old horse remained unchanged by the chaos swirling around him, content to eat his carefully measured meals, accept grooming from Iris on weekends, and doze in his stall while the world argued about his future. On Valentine's Day, Dr. Thornton called an emergency committee meeting. Finn wasn't usually included in these, but she asked him to come, and something in her voice made his stomach clench with worry. He arrived at the community hall to find the committee members gathered with grim faces. "We got the appraisal back," Dr. Thornton said without preamble. "The property is worth $95,000. With closing costs and immediate repairs, we'd need at least $110,000 to make this work." "How much do we have?" Finn asked, though he could read the answer in the room's heavy silence. $62,000. Dr. Thornton's voice was flat. "We're short by nearly $50,000, and we've exhausted most of our immediate fundraising options. The crowdfunding has slowed. The grants won't be awarded until after the deadline." "So we lost," someone said quietly. "Not yet," Reverend Oakes said firmly. "We have 3 weeks. That's enough time for a miracle if we're willing to work for it." But even she sounded uncertain. $50,000 was an impossible gap. They all knew it. Finn felt the walls closing in. After everything, after all the effort and hope and community investment, it wasn't enough. Vale would win because he had what mattered most in these situations: money and legal rights and the cold logic of development. That night, lying in his sleeping bag with Cashin sleeping peacefully in the next stall, Finn allowed himself to cry. Quiet tears that soaked into the fabric and left him feeling hollow. He tried so hard. They all had. But sometimes trying wasn't enough. Sometimes the world won anyway. He must have fallen asleep eventually because he woke to someone shaking his shoulder. Nana knelt beside him in the pre-dawn darkness, her face serious. "Get up. We need to go home. There's someone you need to see." Confused and still half asleep, Finn followed her to the truck. They drove through empty streets to the house where a rental car sat in the driveway. Finn's confusion deepened into shock when he walked through the door and found his mother sitting at Nana's kitchen table. She looked different, thinner with shadows under her eyes, but also more present somehow. She stood when Finn entered, and for a long moment they just looked at each other across the small kitchen. "Hi, baby," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry I waited so long to come." Finn didn't know what to say. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been hollow-eyed and distant, barely able to function through grief. He'd been sent away because his presence hurt too much, a living reminder of the man she'd lost. "I saw the news story," his mother continued, "about what you've been doing, about the horse." She wiped at her eyes. "Your father would have been so proud." Something cracked in Finn's chest, the careful walls he'd built starting to crumble. "Dad carved horses," he said, "when he was my age. Nana showed me." His mother nodded, tears flowing freely now. "He never stopped loving them. Used to tell me someday we'd get a place with land, have horses again." She crossed the kitchen and pulled Finn into a hug that smelled like home and felt like forgiveness. "I'm so sorry I sent you away. I was drowning and I thought seeing you made it worse, but I was wrong. You weren't the reminder of what I lost. You're the reminder of what I still have." They stood there in Nana's kitchen holding each other while something broken started to heal. Not completely, grief didn't work that way, but enough to let light in around the edges. Later, over breakfast, Finn told his mother everything. About finding Cashin. About Dr. Thornton and Iris and all the people who'd helped. About the community rallying and the fight against Vale. About how they were $50,000 short with 3 weeks left. His mother listened without interrupting, and when he finished she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Can I meet him? The horse?" They drove to Thornhill Farm together, just the two of them. Finn led his mother across the field where he'd first found Cashin dying in the grass. So much had changed since that November morning. The field looked different in winter light. The barn stood solid with its new roof and sealed walls. And Cashin, when Finn opened the stall door, stood bright-eyed and alert instead of collapsed in the mud. Finn's mother approached slowly, her hand extended. Cashin lowered his head and allowed her to stroke his face, his clouded eyes patient and kind. "Your father always said horses could sense grief," she murmured, "that they carried their own and recognized it in others." She looked at Finn with something like wonder. "You found each other when you both needed saving." They stood there together, mother and son, an old white horse, and something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or acceptance. The acknowledgement that loss didn't have to be the end of the story, that love could persist even through devastating pain, that choosing to care was always worth it even when caring hurt. When they returned to the house, Finn's mother made a phone call. He couldn't hear the whole conversation, but he caught fragments. Life insurance. Liquidating assets. Wire transfer. When she hung up, she looked at Finn with steady eyes. "Your father had a life insurance policy. Couldn't touch it. Couldn't bear to. Felt like profiting from his death." She took a deep breath. But he would have wanted this. Would have wanted his death to mean something beyond grief. She reached across the table and took Finn's hand. "I'm donating $50,000 to the sanctuary fund. In your father's name." Finn couldn't breathe. The number was impossible, perfect, exactly what they needed. But more than that was what it represented. His mother choosing life over paralysis. His father's death creating something beautiful instead of just absence. Everything coming together in a way that felt less like coincidence and more like grace. Dr. Thornton cried when she got the call. So did Reverend Oakes. The committee met that night in celebration rather than desperation. And by week's end the paperwork was in motion. They had the money. They had the community support. They had lawyers and accountants and a clear vision for what the sanctuary could become. Vale tried one last time to block the sale, arguing that his original agreement with the property owner should take precedence. But the Thornhill daughter, when contacted by Reverend Oakes, admitted she'd felt guilty about abandoning Cashin and was glad to see the property go to people who'd care for it properly. She chose the sanctuary offer over Vale's higher bid, and there was nothing he could do about it. On March 15th, 2 weeks after the original deadline, the Millbrook Hollow Community Sanctuary officially opened. A small celebration was held at the barn with the whole town attending. Iris cut the ribbon, her hands steady now, her voice clear as she read from a card she'd made. "This is a place for broken things to heal, for people and animals who need somewhere safe. For everyone who believes caring matters more than profit." The crowd applauded and someone started singing, an old hymn about grace and redemption. Others joined in until the barn filled with voices lifted together. Finn stood beside Cashin with his mother's hand on his shoulder, and Nana beside him, and Dr. Thornton nearby, and Iris beaming from the crowd. All these people who'd become family through the simple act of showing up, of refusing to accept that some things were too broken to fix. Cashin, for his part, seemed unbothered by the celebration. He accepted treats from a dozen different hands, allowed countless children to pet his face, and stood with patient dignity while speeches were made about hope and community and the power of one person choosing to care. Later, after everyone had left and the sun was setting over the hills, Finn sat in the straw beside the old horse. They'd been together 4 months now. The dying horse was gone, replaced by this creature who'd never be young or sound, but who was undeniably alive. Healing wasn't the same as healed, but it was enough. "You know what's funny?" Finn said quietly. "I thought I was saving you. Turns out we saved each other." Cashin exhaled warm breath against Finn's hair, a sound that felt like agreement. In the weeks that followed, the sanctuary grew. Dr. Thornton moved her practice there, seeing animals 3 days a week. Mr. Yamada brought his shop students to build additional stalls and a covered pavilion. Sophie and Emma organized school field trips. Iris came every weekend, her voice growing stronger as she helped care for new arrivals. A goat with a broken leg, a dog too old for the shelter, a pair of chickens rescued from neglect. The sanctuary became what Reverend Oakes had envisioned. Not just a place for broken animals, but for broken people too. A space where showing up and trying mattered more than succeeding perfectly. Where vulnerability was met with gentleness instead of judgment. Where the weakest among them were given dignity and care. And at the center of it all stood Cashin, the old white horse who'd survived abandonment and starvation, who'd been given up on by everyone except one stubborn boy who refused to look away. He became the sanctuary's heart, the living reminder of what was possible when people chose compassion over convenience. Finn didn't move back home right away. He stayed with Nana through the end of the school year, but his mother visited every weekend. They were rebuilding their relationship slowly, both of them learning to carry grief without letting it crush them. Eventually they'd figure out what came next. But there was no rush. They had time now. Time bought by choosing to care about an old horse on a cold November morning. On the anniversary of finding Cashin, Finn stood at the fence watching the white horse graze in the sanctuary's meadow. A year ago he'd been a boy drowning in loss, sent away because his presence hurt too much. Now he was someone different. Someone who understood that saving things was never simple or easy but always worth trying. Someone who knew that being broken didn't mean being worthless. Someone who'd learned that hope could grow even in the coldest season if you were brave enough to tend it. Cashin lifted his head, those clouded eyes finding Finn across the distance. The old horse walked over slowly, arthritis making his gait stiff but steady. He pressed his forehead to Finn's chest in the gesture that had become their language. Here, present, alive. Finn closed his eyes and leaned into the warmth, feeling the proof of survival, the weight of love, the simple miracle of not giving up. Behind him, Millbrook Hollow continued its life, a town that had learned to fight for what mattered, to preserve beauty instead of just pursuing profit, to remember that caring was never wasted even when outcomes remained uncertain. And here, in this meadow with this horse, a boy who'd lost everything learned he could still build something worth keeping. Not by avoiding pain or pretending loss didn't matter, but by choosing over and over to show up, to try, to care even when caring hurt. The sun climbed higher, warming the valley. Somewhere in town, Iris was drawing. Dr. Thornton was tending to a new rescue. Sophie and Emma were planning the next fundraiser. Nana was serving coffee at the diner and telling anyone who'd listen about her remarkable grandson. Finn's mother was driving down from the city with fresh carrots and a heart learning to hope again. All of them connected by this. By an old white horse nobody had cared about until a boy found him and gave him hope. By the choice to see value where others saw worthlessness. By the stubborn belief that some things were worth saving even when the world said otherwise. Cashin shifted beside Finn, content in this moment, in this meadow, in this life that had been saved and had in turn saved so many others. And Finn, standing beside the horse who'd taught him about resilience and grace, and the courage it took to keep breathing when breathing felt impossible, finally understood. They'd both been dying that November morning in different ways. But they'd found each other. And finding each other had been enough to start healing. To start living again. To prove that even in the darkest seasons, hope could take root if someone was brave enough to plant it. The valley stretched wide around them, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time in a very long time, Finn looked toward the future without fear. Because he'd learned the most important lesson of all. That caring always mattered, that trying always counted, and that sometimes the broken things you saved ended up saving you right back. Spring arrived late that year, hesitant and tentative, as though winter was reluctant to release its grip on the valley. But when it finally came, it transformed Millbrook Hollow with a ferocity that felt like compensation for the brutal cold that had preceded it. Wildflowers erupted across the meadows in waves of purple and gold. The apple trees along the ridge burst into clouds of white blossoms. Copper Creek swelled with snowmelt, rushing over rocks with a voice that sounded like celebration. The sanctuary had been operating for 2 months, and already it housed more than just Cashin. A 3-legged beagle named Scout had arrived in April, surrendered by owners who couldn't afford the surgery he'd needed after a car accident. 2 pot-bellied pigs came next, rescued from a hoarding situation 3 counties over. Then came rabbits, guinea pigs, a sullen cat with one eye, and a miniature donkey so ancient nobody could determine his actual age. Each arrival brought new challenges. Dr. Thornton worked tirelessly, her retirement fully abandoned now in favor of this new purpose. She'd hired an assistant, a recent veterinary school graduate named Marcus Chin who'd grown up on a farm and understood the rhythm of animal care. Together they managed the medical needs of a growing population while Finn and an expanding group of volunteers handled daily feeding and maintenance. Iris had become indispensable. She arrived every Saturday morning at dawn, her mother dropping her off with a packed lunch and instructions to call when she was ready to be picked up. The girl who'd been silent for 8 months now narrated her entire routine to the animals, her voice steady and sure as she explained what she was doing and why. The selective mutism hadn't vanished completely. She still struggled to speak in certain situations, but here at the sanctuary, her words flowed freely. She had a particular gift with the frightened animals, the ones who'd been abused or neglected. She'd sit outside their enclosures for hours, drawing them over and over until they grew accustomed to her presence. Then she'd begin speaking softly, telling them stories about Cashin, about how he'd been dying and alone and how Finn had refused to give up, as though the white horse's story was proof that survival was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, that broken things could heal. On a Saturday in late May, Finn found Iris in Scout's kennel. The 3-legged beagle curled in her lap while she sketched his profile. The dog had been terrified when he'd arrived, snapping at anyone who came close, his trauma making him aggressive in his fear. But Iris had worked with him patiently, and now he followed her everywhere, his hopping gait awkward but determined. "He's going to be okay," Iris said without looking up from her drawing. "He just needed time to remember that people can be kind." Finn settled against the kennel wall beside her. "You're really good at this, helping them trust again." Iris was quiet for a moment, her pencil moving across the paper. "Cashin taught me something. That being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you've been hurt. But hurt doesn't have to be forever." The wisdom in her words struck Finn hard. This 9-year-old girl who'd lost her voice to trauma had found it again through caring for broken creatures. And in finding her voice, she discovered truths that some people spent lifetimes searching for. "Your sister," Finn ventured carefully. "How is she doing?" Iris's hand stilled on the paper. "She's learning to use a wheelchair. It's hard for her. She gets angry a lot. But I told her about Cashin, about how he can't see well and his legs hurt but he still gets up every day." She paused. "I think it helped, knowing that living with damage doesn't mean giving up." They sat together in comfortable silence, Scout snoring softly in Iris's lap, the morning sun streaming through the kennel window. Finn thought about all the ways healing rippled outward, how saving Cashin had created space for Iris to heal, and how Iris's healing was now touching her sister, and how that healing would probably touch others in turn. It was like dropping a stone in still water and watching the circles expand infinitely outward. The sanctuary had become more than just a refuge for animals. It had become a teaching ground. Mr. Yamada brought his shop students regularly now, using the facility as a laboratory for practical construction projects. They'd built a chicken coop, a rabbit hutch, an equipment shed. Each project served a real need while teaching rail skills, and Finn noticed how the students moved differently when they worked here. With purpose. With pride in creating something that mattered beyond a grade. Sophie and Emma had started a junior volunteer program, recruiting classmates to help with weekend chores. What began as 6 students had grown to 20, then 30. They came in shifts, mucking stalls, filling water buckets, distributing feed. Some discovered they loved the work and came back week after week. Others tried it once and never returned. But all of them left having touched something beyond themselves, having participated however briefly in the act of caring for creatures that needed help. Finn's role had evolved too. He was no longer just the boy who'd found a dying horse. He'd become the sanctuary's heart in a way he hadn't expected or sought. People looked to him for guidance, for reassurance, for the steady presence he'd developed through months of showing up regardless of how he felt. Dr. Thornton had started calling him her assistant, teaching him more advanced care techniques, trusting him with responsibilities that would have overwhelmed him 6 months ago. His mother had moved back to Millbrook Hollow in April, renting a small house on the edge of town. She'd found work at the county library, a quiet job that gave her time to heal while staying close to Finn. They had dinner together most nights, either at her place or Nana's, rebuilding their relationship through shared meals and honest conversations about grief and guilt and the slow work of moving forward. She came to the sanctuary often, usually in the evenings when the day's work was winding down. She'd find Finn in the barn and they'd walk the property together, her hand sometimes resting on his shoulder, both of them aware of how far they traveled from those dark months after the accident. The silence between them now was companionable rather than painful, filled with the sound of animals settling for the night and the wind moving through new leaves. One evening in early June, she stood beside him watching Cashin graze in the meadow. The old horse moved slowly, his arthritis worse on damp days, but he moved with contentment. His coat gleamed white in the fading light, carefully groomed by Iris that morning. The visible ribs were still there, they always would be, but they no longer spoke of starvation. They were simply part of who he was, evidence of survival rather than suffering. "I've been thinking about your father a lot," Finn's mother said quietly, "about what he'd make of all this." She smiled, though her eyes were damp. "He'd probably have 1,000 ideas for improvements. Ways to make the barn more efficient, systems for tracking medical care. You know how he was with problems, always wanting to solve them." Finn leaned against the fence rail. "I wish he could see it. The sanctuary, Cashin, everything." His mother's hand found his shoulder. "Maybe he does. I don't know what I believe about after, but I want to think he knows. That he sees you've become someone remarkable. Someone who takes broken things and helps them heal." "I'm not remarkable. I just couldn't walk away." She turned him to face her, her expression fierce with love. "That's exactly what makes you remarkable. Most people can walk away. They do it every day. Choose comfort over difficulty, convenience over compassion. You didn't. Even when it was hard. Even when you were grieving. You chose to care anyway." They stood there as darkness gathered, mother and son finding their way back to each other through the language of a saved horse and a sanctuary built on hope. Later, walking back to the barn, Finn's mother mentioned she'd been contacted by a journalist from a national magazine. They wanted to do a feature story about the sanctuary, about how a small town had rallied to save an old horse and ended up creating something that served the whole community. Finn's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want attention or recognition. But his mother made a good point. Stories like this could inspire other communities. Show them that preservation was possible, that caring could win against profit, that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together. So he agreed, and the journalist came the following week. Her name was Patricia Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a recorder she set on the picnic table Mr. Yamada's students had built. She interviewed Finn for hours, asking about finding Cashin, about the decision to try saving him, about how the community had responded. She interviewed Dr. Thornton and Iris and Reverend Oakes and a dozen others, piecing together the full story. But she spent the most time with Cashin himself. She stood at his fence for nearly an hour, just watching him, occasionally making notes but mostly observing. When she finally put her notebook away, she approached Finn with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You know what strikes me most? It's not that you saved him. It's that he's teaching everyone who comes here. About patience. About dignity despite damage. About the value of life even when that life isn't perfect or productive in traditional ways." She glanced back at the white horse. In a world that wants everything to be efficient and profitable, he's proof that some things matter simply because they exist. The article appeared 2 months later in a glossy magazine that arrived at newsstands across the country. The cover showed Cashin in the meadow with Finn standing beside him, one hand resting on the horse's neck. The headline read, "The Horse Nobody Wanted and the Boy Who Wouldn't Give Up. How a Dying Animal Saved a Town's Soul." Inside were photos of the sanctuary, of Iris with Scout, of volunteers at work, of Dr. Thornton examining a new arrival. But the centerpiece was Cashin, his clouded eyes staring directly at the camera, with an expression that somehow conveyed both weariness and peace. The article told the whole story, from that November morning when Finn had found him dying to the thriving sanctuary that had grown from one boy's refusal to look away. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived daily, from people across the country who'd been moved by the story. Donations poured in, more than the sanctuary could immediately use. Other communities reached out asking for advice on starting similar programs. Schools requested Finn as a speaker, wanting him to talk to students about compassion and perseverance. Preston Vale gave a bitter interview to a business publication, calling the sanctuary economically inefficient and a barrier to regional development. But his words fell flat against the tide of support. The people had spoken with their donations and letters and visits. They'd chosen the sanctuary over the strip mall, chosen preservation over profit, chosen to believe that an old white horse mattered more than commercial development. By summer's end, the sanctuary housed 32 animals. Dr. Thornton had hired 2 more assistants. The volunteer program had expanded to include adults. Local businesses sponsored individual animals, their logos displayed on plaques outside each enclosure alongside the animal story. The sanctuary had become woven into the fabric of Millbrook Hollow, as essential to the town's identity as the church or the diner or Copper Creek itself. But for Finn, the measure of success wasn't in numbers or recognition. It was in the small moments. Iris reading to Scout in the evening light. A child's face transforming when Cashin allowed them to pet his nose. His mother laughing genuinely for the first time since the accident. Nana saying she was proud of him. Dr. Thornton teaching him to stitch a wound. The morning routine that had become as natural as breathing. On the anniversary of the sanctuary's opening, the town threw a celebration that rivaled any holiday. The meadow filled with families, music playing from speakers someone had rigged, tables laden with food appearing as people brought dishes to share. Reverend Oakes gave a speech about community and compassion. The mayor, who'd been skeptical at first but had come around, presented Finn with a key to the city. But the moment that mattered most to Finn came later, when the crowds had thinned and the sun was setting. He found Cashin in the barn, the old horse resting in his stall, content after a day of gentle attention from dozens of visitors. Finn entered the stall and settled into the straw beside him, his back against the wall, just like he'd done so many times before. "You know what's funny?" Finn said, echoing words he'd spoken before but meaning them even more deeply now. "I thought I was saving you, but you saved me. You saved all of us." Cashin's ear swiveled toward his voice, but the horse didn't lift his head. He was 29 now, ancient by any measure, each day a gift nobody had expected. Dr. Thornton said he could have months left or years. There was no way to know. His body was failing in the slow way of old creatures, joints stiffening, eyesight fading further, each system gradually shutting down. But he wasn't suffering. That was the important thing. He had comfort and care and purpose. Children visited him daily, finding courage in his patient presence. Adults brought their own grief and discovered that being broken didn't mean being worthless. And Finn, sitting beside him in the gathering darkness, knew that whenever Cashin's time came, it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a completion, because this horse had already died once, alone in a field while the world looked away. Everything since had been bonus time, extra grace, a second chance that had transformed into something miraculous. Not because Cashin had recovered fully, he hadn't, but because his imperfect survival had taught everyone who encountered him that life's value wasn't measured in productivity or perfection. It was measured in presence, in breath, in the simple fact of being. Finn's phone buzzed with a text from his mother asking if he'd be home for dinner. He responded that he'd be there soon, then pocketed the phone and stayed a while longer. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Scout's snoring from his kennel, the pigs rooting in their straw, the ancient donkey shifting his weight with a sigh. This had become Finn's cathedral, this collection of broken things learning to be whole. He'd found his purpose here in the work of caring for creatures that needed help. Dr. Thornton had started talking about him going to veterinary school someday, and the idea didn't seem impossible anymore. Maybe that was his path. Maybe his father's death would ultimately lead to a life spent healing, the tragedy transformed into something redemptive. Or maybe not. Maybe he'd discover a different calling. The future was open in a way it hadn't been a year ago when grief had made everything seem closed and final. He had time to figure it out. Time bought by showing up every day, by refusing to give up, by choosing over and over to care even when caring was difficult. Cashin exhaled deeply, a sound of complete relaxation, and Finn felt his own body mirror the release. They'd both been holding tension for so long, surviving on determination and stubbornness, fighting to make it through one more day. But somewhere along the way, survival had transformed into living. The fight had softened into acceptance. The fear had been replaced by peace. Finn stood eventually, brushing straw from his jeans. He checked Cashin's water bucket, confirmed the stall door was secure, and paused for one last look at the white horse resting in clean bedding under a solid roof. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals needing help, new people seeking the comfort of this place. But tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. Walking back through the sanctuary grounds, Finn noticed lights in the windows of houses across the valley. Millbrook Hollow settling into evening, families gathering for dinner, the rhythms of ordinary life continuing. But it wasn't quite the same town it had been a year ago. Something had shifted. The people had remembered that they could choose what they preserved and what they let go. That they had agency in shaping their community's future. That caring still mattered in a world that often seemed to value only efficiency and profit. One old horse had taught them that. One boy's refusal to walk away had sparked something that kept burning, spreading warmth through the cold places, lighting the way forward. Finn reached the edge of the property where the path to town began. He turned back for one final glimpse of the barn, solid and whole against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, Cashin was sleeping, an ancient horse who'd survived impossible odds. And surrounding him were all the other creatures who'd found refuge here. Each one proof that broken things could heal, that caring could triumph over indifference, that hope could take root even in the hardest ground. The stars were emerging overhead, the same stars that had witnessed that November morning when everything changed. Finn thought about the boy he'd been then, drowning in grief, sent away because his presence hurt too much. That boy felt like a stranger now, someone he'd left behind in the process of becoming whoever he was now. Someone stronger, someone who understood that strength wasn't about never breaking, it was about choosing to mend. Someone who'd learned that the most important question wasn't whether you could fix everything, but whether you'd try anyway. The wind carried the scent of honeysuckle and fresh hay, of summer arriving and animals safe in their shelters. Finn breathed it in, let it fill his lungs, felt the proof of living settle into his bones. Then he turned toward home where his mother was waiting, where dinner would be warm and conversation would flow, where they'd continue the slow work of rebuilding what loss had shattered. Behind him, the sanctuary held its breath in the darkness. Ahead, the lights of Millbrook Hollow welcomed him back. And Finn walked between them, connected to both, carrying the knowledge that he'd found his place in the world, not through seeking it, but through caring enough to stay when staying was hard. Some stories ended with triumph, with complete victories and perfect resolutions. This wasn't that kind of story. This was quieter, messier, more honest. It was about showing up despite uncertainty, about caring despite the risk of loss, about choosing again and again to try even when outcomes remained unclear. It was the story of an old white horse nobody had wanted and the boy who'd given him hope. But more than that, it was the story of how that hope had multiplied, spreading through a community until it transformed into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. It was proof that one act of compassion could ripple outward indefinitely, touching lives in ways that couldn't be measured or predicted. And it was still being written, every day, in every animal that arrived needing help, in every volunteer who showed up to work, in every child who learned that caring mattered, in every person who chose preservation over profit and compassion over convenience. The story would continue long after Cashin was gone, long after Finn had moved on to whatever came next. Because stories like this didn't really end. They just kept expanding, kept reaching, kept reminding people of what was possible when you refused to look away from suffering, when you chose to try even when trying seemed hopeless. Finn reached Nana's house where his mother's car sat in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, he could see them both moving around, setting the table, preparing the meal. Home, family, the ordinary grace of another evening together. He paused with his hand on the door, taking one more moment to feel the fullness of this life he'd built from the broken pieces. Then he went inside to the warmth and the light and the people who loved him, carrying with him the knowledge that he'd done something that mattered. He'd saved a horse, and in saving that horse, he'd helped save a town's belief in its own goodness. And in helping save that belief, he'd saved himself. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.